Hey everyone, welcome back, or welcome in for the first time. Tonight, we're drifting back to a quieter corner of history. So go ahead, settle in, dim whatever lights are still stubbornly on, and get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop a little. Good. Just like that. Tonight we're going to wander through the mind of someone who didn't sleep nearly enough for his own good, which means he'd probably fit right in with all of us right now. A man whose notebooks look like the product of boredom, insomnia, and divine intervention, all arguing in the same room. Yes, Leonardo da Vinci. De myth, the walking Renaissance to-do list, and specifically, we're drifting through some of his inventions, many of which never made it off the page, probably because they would have been physically impossible, wildly impractical, or required materials that didn't exist yet, or, because he got distracted by painting something extremely detailed for 20 years. Let's start at the beginning. Or at least at a place reasonable enough for a sleepy evening. Leonardo's Mine, a gentle, chaotic prelude. Leonardo was born in 1452, which was a great year for everyone who enjoys frescoes, and a confusing era for anyone who likes their birth records neat. He arrived in the small Tuscan town of Vinci, because of course he did, and his father was a well-connected notary, while his mother was, well, the records debate that part a bit more than they probably should. It was the 15th century. Paperwork was optional. From the moment he could hold anything resembling a pen, Leonardo was sketching things that made people tilt their heads a little. Birds, water, faces, machines, anatomical studies that would have made a medieval priest politely close the page and go pray for a minute. His brain didn't seem to have an off switch or a snooze button. Honestly, if he lived today, he probably would have been diagnosed with about 9 different things. And he would have immediately invented a new, more efficient diagnostic device, while the doctor was trying to explain the first one. But from that restless energy came hundreds of inventions. Most brilliant, some baffling. A few that would definitely get him banned from any modern ethics board. So let's drift in, slowly, and look at a few. The ornithopter. Leonardo's flapping flying machine. Let's start with one of his favorites, the ornithopter. A flying machine meant to flap its wings like a bird. Because Leonardo decided that if nature already solved the physics of getting off the ground, he might as well borrow the homework. The design is beautiful, of course it is. The sketch looks like something an angel would fly down on if it were moonlighting as a Renaissance delivery driver. Stretched wings, elegant shape, a human operating it, lying face down, pedaling and pulling at 3 different contraptions that look suspiciously like medieval torture devices. The real question here is, would it have worked? Absolutely not. Not even a little. A human simply can't generate enough power to flap wings big enough to lift, well, anything heavier than a well-fed pigeon, and Leonardo's version required the operator to flap with all the frantic energy of someone trying to escape a very determined goose. Leonardo didn't know that. Or maybe he did, and simply wanted to draw pretty wings. Either way, we can admire the effort. It shows the core of Leonardo's personality, observing nature, copying it carefully, and then ignoring every physical law that got in the way. Let's drift gently over to something a little more grounded. The armored tank that looked like a turtle in a bad mood now. Leonardo lived in Renaissance Italy, where cities were run by noble families who woke up every morning and chose violence. If your name ended in Di Medici Ors Forza, you were legally required to wage at least 1 petty feud a month. So naturally, Leonardo got hired to design weapons. His armored tank is one of the more famous inventions, and it looks, well, like a very angry tortoise. A rounded shell of sloped armor, gun ports arranged in a neat ring, a hatch on top where a commander could pop out and shout orders while pretending he wasn't he in a giant wooden panic room on wheels. Inside, Leonardo planned for 8 men to turn cranks to make the whole machine move, which sounds noble, until you imagine 8 soldiers, sweating profusely, trapped inside a dark wooden dome full of gunpowder, arguing loudly about who forgot to oil the gears. There's also the minor issue that Leonardo, whether by mistake or passive aggressiveness, drew the gearing system backwards. The wheels would have locked up the moment anyone tried to move. Now, some historians think this was deliberate. That Leonardo, who wasn't exactly a fan of war, sabotaged his own design so that nobody could use it. Others think he just made a mistake because he was sketching it at 2 a.m. after spending the entire day dissecting a horse. Either way, the armored tank never rolled into battle, which is arguably for the best, because if it had, it would have traveled about 3 feet and immediately fallen over. Still, it looked impressive, and sometimes, looking impressive is half the Renaissance battlefield. Let's drift onward. The self-propelled cart. The first robot vehicle nobody asked for. Leonardo's self-propelled cart is one of his inventions that actually worked, a rare phrase in this episode. Imagine a wooden cart powered by coiled springs, a little like winding up a giant toy. Release the springs, and the cart rolls forward on its own. You can even adjust its steering, making it turn corners, which is something many kings of the era struggled with conceptually. Fun fact, modern engineers who reconstructed it were surprised at how well it functioned. It's widely considered the first self-moving robot vehicle. Less fun fact, Leonardo never actually built it himself. It lived in his sketchbook, like a very ambitious grocery list, until modern researchers decided to give it a go. Still, it shows off Leonardo's mind at full power. The man was designing robots before the word robot existed, before the word engine existed, before anyone even had a clear definition of personal space, let alone engineering. Let's wander softly to something more watery. Leonardo's diving suit. A Renaissance fever dream of underwater warfare at some point. Leonardo became fascinated with underwater combat. Just casual thoughts, as one does when walking through Venice. He sketched a leather diving suit, complete with goggles, a breathing tube, and a pouch for holding tools, or, presumably, snacks. His idea was to let soldiers sabotage enemy ships from below. The concept was brilliant. The execution, les so. The breathing tube was supposed to run from the diver's mask up to the surface, ending in a floating bell so that air could reach the diver, which sounds fine until you realize the floating bell would very obviously show the diver's location, so the diver would sneak up, very quietly, while trailing the maritime equivalent of a bright neon hit me sign, and if the waves got too rough, the tube kinked. The diver suffocated. End of innovation. Leonardo meant well. But sometimes his ideas were like trying to do yoga in a small bathroom, technically possible, but you're going to hit your elbow on something important. Let's float over to one more airborne dream. The parachute. The thing that probably would have worked if anyone wanted to try it. Leonardo sketched a parachute shaped like a pyramid, made of linen with wooden beams. He wrote that a person could jump from any height with it and survive. This was an era where most people were suspicious of stairs taller than 6 steps. So you can imagine how many volunteers lined up to test it. That's right. 0. Still, centuries later, someone did try it using Leonardo's exact dimensions, and it worked at smooth descent, no broken bones, no panicked screaming. An unusual experience for anyone reenacting Renaissance engineering. Leonardo's instinct was right. Slow the fall, widen the surface area, and trust basic physics. And if you fail, at least you did so in style. Let's drift gently onward into the softer part of this sleepy exploration. The aesthetic of genius. Why Leonardo's inventions still feel magical. Leonardo's inventions weren't just sketches. They were dreams on paper, half practical, half whimsical, and all deeply personal. Most of them weren't meant to be built. Many couldn't be built, but they reveal something gentle and very human. A man wandering through ideas the way you or I might wander through a memory while trying to fall asleep. A flying machine shaped like a bird. A parachute shaped like hope. A tank shaped like Fiat turned into geometry. A robot cart shaped like the desire to make something move just because. Leonardo wasn't trying to change the world with these sketches. He was trying to understand it, and maybe trying to keep himself entertained between commissions. Because, let's be honest, some Renaissance patrons were the kind of people who would ask you to paint their faces onto a fresco of the Last Judgment and insist you make them look taller. But Leonardo kept creating. He filled notebook after notebook with thoughts that drift between art and engineering like soft waves. And it's that wandering mind we're following tonight. Quietly, gently, without hurry. Let's continue drifting to the next part, where we'll meet a few historical figures who were significantly less stable than Leonardo's sketches. Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're still awake, which, honestly, Leonardo himself probably wouldn't in for the gentlest unraveling of royal marital disasters the medieval world ever produced. Go ahead and readjust your blanket. Maybe shift your pillow a little. We're sinking into this next chapter slowly, much like some royal bloodlines sank under the weight of their own family trees. Mostly because those trees didn't branch. They sort of curled inward like a slightly embarrassed fern. Tonight we're drifting into the world of royal marriages that went spectacularly, tragically, and let's be honest, genetically, off the rails. And don't worry, we'll keep things soft, calm, and comfortably detached. We're here for gentle history, not dramatic reenactments. Let's drift in. The Habsburg jaw, a family tradition nobody wanted. Our first stop is the ruling dynasty that looked at the concept of genetic diversity and said, quite boldly, no, thank you. The Habsburgs, the royal family whose faces gradually turned into living architectural experiments. Now, the Habsburgs believed in keeping power in the family, and by that, they meant very in the family. Cousins married cousins. Uncles married nieces. At least one Grazuncle married someone who was also his grandniece, which requires a family tree diagram so circular it could qualify as modern art. But let's focus on the most famous result, the Habsburg jaw. If you've never seen it, imagine someone tried sculpting a jawline out of warm wax, and then placed it too close to the fireplace, long, drooping, and a little confused, like it wasn't entirely sure where it was supposed to be. The most legendary example was Charles II of Spain, a man whose face alone could tell you everything you needed to know about 200 years of questionable romantic decisions. Charles Tupur, man struggled with almost everything, speaking clearly, chewing food, walking without assistance, producing heirs, understanding complex political matters, understanding simple political matters, staying alive for more than a couple of decades. Not entirely his fault. He was the final Habsburg product of generation after generation of genetic recycling. His autopsy reportedly revealed a body riddled with issues. His heart was tiny, his lungs were oddly large, and his intestines were described by one physician as putrid and black, which is the medieval medical way of selling? Absolutely not. He died at after which European rulers politely tiptoed into his now vacant throne room and began fighting over Spain, like it was the last loaf of bread in 1700s. Europe. Let's drift onward before things get too bleak. The Ptolemies. When your family reunion is also your marriage pool. If the Habsburgs were an example of what happens when a dynasty accidentally collapses under its own genetic choices, the Ptolemies were the example of what happens when a family does it on purpose. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great carved up the world and then inconveniently died without leaving a forwarding address. They were Macedonian Greeks, ruling a land where pharaohs traditionally married their siblings, and the Ptolemies took one look at that custom and said, perfect, we'll take it. Brother married sister. Sister married brother. Sometimes they repeated it across multiple generations. It was the royal equivalent of photocopying a photocopy, until the image gets increasingly blurry. Even Cleopatra's. That Cleopatra was the product of several generations of this strategy, but she turned out surprisingly sharp, charismatic, multilingual, and politically brilliant. Sort of like the genetic equivalent of rolling a natural 20. Her siblings, less so. Her brother husband Ptolemy XIII was around 13 years old when they, which is a generous way of saying, Cleopatra did the work while he was being manipulated by advisors who had all the political subtlety of a house fire. Eventually the pair went to war, because nothing says healthy marriage like raising armies against one another. He drowned in the Nile while trying to escape, which is the ancient world's way of wrapping up a family dispute neatly. Cleopatra then married her other brother, Ptolemy XIV. Look, options were limited. And again, it went badly. He died mysteriously, probably poisoned by Cleopatra, who had truly had enough at this point. This branch of human history is peak insomnia material, but we're keeping it soft and distant, like eavesdropping on the world's most dysfunctional soap opera through a very thick pillow. Let's float on. The Stuarts. When your bloodline is a slow-motion tragedy, the Stuarts of Scotland and England weren't known for inbreeding to Habsburg levels, but their marriages were so politically disastrous that the outcomes might as well have been genetically cursed. Take Mary, Queen of Scots, who had a habit of marrying men who seemed custom-built by fate to make her life worse. Her first husband, King Francis II of France, was delicate, very delicate. Let's say if you looked at him too sternly, he might catch a cold. He died at 16 after ruling for about a year, leaving Mary widowed and politically stranded. Then she married Henry, Lord Darnley, a man whose resume included being handsome, arrogant, violent, irresponsible, jealous, and how shall we say this, not very bright. He drank too much, he demanded too much power, he insulted people for fun. He was angry that Mary spent more time running a kingdom than complimenting his outfits. Eventually, he helped murder her secretary because he thought they were too close. Then he was murdered shortly afterward in an explosion so suspicious it could have been written by Shakespeare's messier cousin. Mary's third marriage was to the man suspected of killing her second husband, which is a choice. Not a good one, but certainly a choice. This marriage, shockingly, did not calm Scotland down. Mary ended up imprisoned, then exiled, then executed by Elizabeth I, whose own love life was famously non-existent, possibly because she watched the rest of her family tree implode and decided, no, thank you. Let's drift gently to a more mythologized family, Tangle. The Targaryen-level tragedy of the Spanish Bourbons, long before HBO made fictional dragons fashionable. The Spanish Bourbon dynasty was busy showing the world what happens when a royal family tries to keep its lineage pure, while also accumulating every recessive gene known to science. You'd think the Bourbons might look at the Habsburgs and say, let's do the opposite of that. But no. They simply continued the tradition of marrying close relatives or political allies, who were also, unfortunately, close relatives. This produced a string of kings who were increasingly sickly, frail, nearsighted, anxious, or psychologically unstable. King Ferdinand VII was so disliked that some Spaniards celebrated his death by ringing church bells and spontaneously taking naps in the street out of sheer relief. His daughter, Isabella II, inherited the throne at age 3. Grew up in a palace so riddled with intrigue, it made the average reality show look emotionally healthy, and married her cousin. Naturally, the union was miserable. Isabella had numerous lovers, her husband had numerous lovers, and half the royal court had opinions about which lover belonged to which spouse. Eventually Spain simply threw her out and called it a day. Let's drift a little further very gently, to the final stretch of this sleepy royal labyrinth. The Romanovs, the last, fragile branch of a long dynasty. The Russian Romanovs weren't known for inbreeding the way the Habsburgs were, but when they did mix genes with other European houses, it did not go well. Kasim Pontanzarovich Alexei, son of Nicholas II and Alexandra, Alexei inherited hemophilia, a blood condition that made injuries incredibly dangerous. This came from Queen Victoria's lineage, a genetic gift that kept on giving in the worst possible way. The royal parents were distraught. The court panicked, and into this atmosphere walked Rasputin, a wandering mystic with questionable hygiene and excellent timing. Rasputin managed to calm Alexei during medical crises, probably by reducing the stress level in the room, something modern medicine can explain. But the deeply anxious Romanovs were happy to call a miracle. Of course, the Russian aristocracy reacted by going into full meltdown mode. Plots were formed, poison was purchased. Assassination attempts were carried out with all the precision of a drunk bear trying to open a pickle jar, but none of it saved the dynasty. Alexius' illness symbolized the fragility of an empire whose rulers were woefully unprepared for the 20th century. Revolution swept them out like dust, and that which is all very sad and very distant is where we gently pause this section. Because this is a sleep story, not a Let's take a soft, calming breath together. Good, we'll drift to the next chapter whenever you're ready. Hey, everyone, we're still awake, together, slowly, gently wandering through history. And now we arrive at the part of history where rulers were spectacularly bad at emotional regulation. And yet, somehow, they ruled entire countries, which is sort of like putting someone who panics over spilled milk in charge of a nuclear power plant. So settle in, let your eyes drift. We're going to explore the lives of royals who were petty, dysfunctional, or just hopelessly spoiled. Because, apparently, being king or queen does not automatically improve your personality. Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, and his little grievances. Let's start with Louis XIV, the man who made absolute monarchy sound like a reasonable idea, while also inventing an entire lifestyle of complaining about small inconveniences. He was nicknamed the Sun King, which sounds impressive, until you remember he also demanded that everyone bow to him constantly, no matter how inconvenient. Dinner was a formal ceremony. Walking in the palace gardens was a negotiation. A simple cough could be considered a minor offense. Louis also had an obsession with hygiene, or rather, the lack of it. He bathed maybe once a month, but insisted that anyone meeting him be immaculately clean. And if they weren't, well, you might be demoted, or worse, politely ignored in a hallway. He famously spent decades building Versailles. Why? Because he wanted to make sure all the nobility were both dazzled and trapped far from Paris. Basically, it was like hosting a gilded daycare for grown men and women, complete with elaborate gardens, endless paperwork, and zero freedom. Even in his personal life, he could be petty. He disliked anyone who opposed him even slightly, and would go to great lengths to make their lives subtly miserable, and naturally, they made it worse in return. Yet somehow, the man ruled France for 72 years, which is longer than most of us have been alive, quietly teaching us that petulance and longevity sometimes go hand in hand. Queen Christina of Sweden, the eccentric recluse. Now let's drift north to Sweden, where Queen Christina reigned in the 17th century. She was brilliant, educated, and spoke multiple languages. And she also dressed as a man sometimes, because, apparently, etiquette was optional if you were bored royal. Christina inherited the throne as a child, which meant she had tutors, advisors, and courtiers, making her life simultaneously easier and more miserable. As she grew older, she became increasingly eccentric. She preferred philosophy over politics, books over balls, debates over dinners. Her court reportedly whispered about her unfeminine habits, which is history is a polite way of saying she didn't behave like most queens. And perhaps most tragically, she abdicated the throne entirely at age 28, leaving Sweden for Rome, where she converted to Catholicism and spent the rest of her life collecting art. The moral here: even queens can decide they had enough of everyone else's expectations. And maybe, just maybe, that's the healthiest decision of all. Charles VI of France, the Mad King, with a sticky note brain, Charles VI, known as Charles the Mad, was a king who suffered from bouts of mental illness that ranged from tragic to, honestly, a little absurd. During one episode, he reportedly attacked his own advisors, mistaking them for enemies. During another, he wandered the palace in full armor, convinced that he was made of glass and would shatter if touched. This was the man responsible for one of the most tumultuous periods in French history, simply by existing in a fragile mental state. His reign shows us that sometimes absolute power meets human fragility, and the results are uncomfortable, but not in a scary way, more like a very slow-motion historical sigh. Empress Elizabeth of Austria-Sisi, and the endless mirrors now. Let's drift to the 19th century. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, affectionately or not so affectionately known as Sisi, was known for her beauty, her strict exercise routines, and her obsession with mirrors. Sisi spent hours in front of mirrors, combing her hair, adjusting her posture, and worrying that her waist was too wide, which, of course, makes sense when you are one of the most photographed women of your time. She resented court life, the endless obligations, and the intrusive court ladies who constantly measured her waist. Her husband, Emperor Franz Joseph, adored her, but couldn't he really understand her desire to escape into the Alps for weeks at a time? Sisi's life is a perfect example of how privilege does not guarantee happiness, and that even a queen can be quietly miserable while everyone around her admires her shiny hair. Peter the Great, the tall, temperamental reformer. Peter the Great of Russia was complicated. He wanted to modernize Russia, and he did so with relentless energy. He introduced new technology, reformed the army, and built a new capital city, St. Petersburg, practically from scratch. But he was also notoriously petty, cruel, and impulsive. He would humiliate nobles by forcing them to learn Dutch, dress in foreign clothes, or serve him at his table sometimes while standing on one leg, just for sport. And yet, he had moments of genuine innovation. He loved ships, mechanics, and engineering. He studied anatomy. He even tried to introduce a meritocracy, though it mostly applied to people willing to suffer his wrath. Peter's life teaches us that brilliance often comes packaged with a bit of a nightmare personality. The takeaway on dysfunctional royals. As we drift toward the end of this chapter, a gentle reflection seems appropriate. Royalty often comes with enormous power, and enormous power often amplifies the quirks, anxieties, and pettiness of human nature. Some kings and queens were brilliant. Some were eccentric. Some were tragically fragile. All of them were, in their own ways, deeply human. Even the Sun King needed to have his shoes polished. Even Sisi needed a quiet room with a mirror. Even Charles the Mad was, well, just trying to exist. And as we imagine them softly, quietly navigating their gilded, chaotic worlds, we can almost feel ourselves sinking into their lives like a warm bath. Calm, distant, and just a little bit amused. Let's take a soft, slow breath together. Good, feel the tension release. The royal absurdities are behind us. For now. Everyone, we're still here, slowly wandering through history's quieter corners. And now, we're going to peer softly into the childhoods of medieval royals. because nothing says bedtime like imagining tiny princes and princesses wrapped in silk, suffering from colic, illness, or crushing loneliness. So adjust your blanket, nestle your head. We're not rushing, we're just drifting gently through the softer side of royal life, the fragility of royal infants. In the medieval period, being born a prince or princess didn't automatically guarantee health or happiness. In fact, it often guaranteed the opposite. High infant mortality rates were the norm. Even in royal households, disease, malnutrition, and poor medical practices lurked behind every velvet curtain. Babies were born with the expectation of survival, and often fell short. Imagine being a child who can barely hold a spoon, yet already carries the weight of an entire kingdom. Your life is scheduled. Your games are supervised. Your cries are occasionally noted in a ledger. Royal parents, understandably, could be distant. Kings and queens were busy negotiating alliances, waging wars, or arranging marriages. Children were often left to nannies, wet nurses, or tutors, who might be kindly or indifferent. The combination of pressure, isolation, and fragile health produced childhoods that were, at best, peculiar, and at worst, quietly tragic. Edward VI of England, the sickly king in waiting. Edward VI of England, son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, was a boy who grew up knowing he might not live to see his next birthday. He inherited the throne at age 9, which meant he had a kingdom to manage while his body struggled to stay healthy. He suffered from chronic illness, most likely tuberculosis or some similar disease, and was often too weak to attend council meetings or even sit through a meal. Despite his frailty, he was brilliant. He read voraciously, learned languages, and took an interest in theology and governance. And yet, the constant fear of illness, the relentless pressure, and the knowledge that he might die young shadowed every aspect of his life. He passed away at 15, and the political chaos that followed his death demonstrates, softly but firmly, the human cost of a royal childhood under enormous expectations. Richard II of England. The isolated child, King Richard II, became king at the age of 10, which, on paper, sounds manageable. Until you consider the reality, England in the 14th century was a tense, dangerous place. Richard grew up surrounded by nobles who were ostensibly loyal, but in reality were calculating, ambitious, and occasionally murderous. He was expected to act regal, to learn politics, to obey etiquette, and to survive constant scrutiny. Imagine a small boy, dressed in velvet and gold, trying to play with other children while also attending council meetings. Imagine the isolation, the constant fear that a careless word might be overheard by someone plotting against your throne. Richard's childhood left him emotionally fragile. He became increasingly detached and eccentric as he grew. Although a king whose decisions were often criticized, misunderstood, or the roots of royal dysfunction often begin very early. Blanche of Castile, the precocious princess. Not all royal childhoods were fraught with illness or political intrigue. Some were shaped by responsibility and pressure. Blanche of Castile, daughter of Alfonso VIII of Castile, grew up preparing to govern. By the age of 10, she was expected to understand diplomacy, alliances, and court etiquette. By 15, she was married to Louis VIII of France, a teenager suddenly responsible for both her husband's well-being and the stability of a kingdom. Her childhood was heavily supervised, highly regimented, and emotionally austere. Playtime was often substituted with lessons on leadership, religion, and etiquette. Her upbringing created a queen who was fiercely competent and quietly stern. In other words, she was excellent at managing crises, and not especially great at enjoying recess. The isolation of princesses in medieval Europe often experienced extreme isolation. Many were confined to palaces or convents, far from family, playmates, or the outside world. Their education, while sometimes impressive, was designed to prepare them for marriage, political, arranged, and often to someone they had never met. Imagine a young girl, skilled in Latin, embroidery, and courtly etiquette, yet never allowed to roam freely. Her life was a series of rehearsed gestures, formal lessons, and constrained interactions. Friendship, spontaneity, and simple joys were luxuries, often denied in favor of preparation for adult responsibilities. This was naturally conducive to developing sharp minds, strong wills, and occasionally a touch of melancholy. The medieval nursery, discipline and oddity, royal nurseries, were not playgrounds. They were small, disciplined environments staffed with tutors, governesses, and wet nurses. The children were observed constantly. Their development was recorded meticulously. Their mistakes might be punished or politely criticized in writing. Some rulers were gentle, some were cruel, many were indifferent. Yet these children learned skills far beyond their years. Reading, writing, languages, and but they also learned caution, suspicion, and how to mask vulnerability. In other words, medieval royal childhoods produced brilliant adults at the cost of enormous emotional strain. Sickly, spoiled, and sad. The emotional landscape many medieval royal children were simultaneously sickly, spoiled, and lonely. Sickly, because of poor medicine, disease, or genetic conditions. Spoiled, because they were treated as miniature monarchs with every whim catered to. And sad, because the combination of illness, isolation, and pressure left them yearning for normalcy that could never exist. Childhood was a performance. Even play was a rehearsal for future responsibilities. Even affection was often conditional, dependent on obedience, politeness, and political usefulness. And yet, some of these children, against all odds, grew into adults who shaped history. Others quietly faded into the margins, victims of circumstance, expectation, and fragile body. Reflection. As we drift toward the end of this chapter, it's worth taking a soft breath, imagining tiny princes and princesses sitting alone in lavish rooms, reading by candlelight, or quietly enduring lessons on statcraft, helps us understand the human costs behind the gilded facade. Royal childhoods were not idyllic. They were structured, disciplined, isolating, and often lonely. But they also produced some of history's most fascinating, intelligent, and capable adults, sometimes resilient, sometimes fragile, always human. We'll pause here and allow the soft melancholy of these lives to settle like twilight over a distant palace. When you're ready, we'll drift into the epilogue, gently reflecting on the strange, dark, and ironic personal lives of historical elites. Hey, everyone. We've wandered slowly through Leonardo's restless mind, disastrous royal marriages, petty monarchs, and lonely, pressured childhoods. Now, let's drift softly toward a reflective conclusion. Because history, for all its battles, politics, and intrigue, is also filled with quietly human moments, ironic mishaps, and gentle absurdities. The irony of power? It's fascinating, in a sleepy sort of way, how much power doesn't solve human problems. Louis XIV could command armies, collect taxes, and dictate court etiquette. Yet he fretted endlessly over shoes, meals, and minor slights. Charles II of Spain had a kingdom at his disposal, and couldn't chew, speak clearly, or produce an heir. Blanche Castile ruled with remarkable competence, and never really had a proper childhood. The takeaway here is subtle but comforting. No amount of gold, crowns, or armies shields anyone from the universal human conditions of fear, weakness, or loneliness. Even the most majestic can suffer quietly. Even the most powerful can be absurd. Small, human moments behind grand titles. History often presents monarchs as distant, monumental figures. But peek behind the curtain, and you see a rich tapestry of small, human moments. A king afraid of glass, a princess obsessed with mirrors, a child prince left alone with tutors while the kingdom waited. These are not always tragic. Sometimes they are quietly funny. Sometimes they are gently sad. But always, they remind us that historical figures, however glorified, were, at their core, human. And that's a soft sort of comfort as we drift towards sleep. We are never alone in our quirks, anxieties, or petty frustrations. Even kings, queens, and geniuses carried them. The delicate dance of genius and folly. Leonardo da Vinci exemplifies this balance. He produced works of unparalleled genius, and also sketched flying machines that would never lift a feather. He dissected cadavers, and obsessively studied the flow of water, while leaving other projects unfinished for decades. His mind wandered, his notebooks overflowed. And yet, centuries later, we are captivated, quietly amazed, and, if we're being honest, a little comforted that even geniuses can be distracted, impractical, or chaotic. The quiet majesty of historical absurdity. There is something soothing in the contradictions of history. Kings who were small-minded yet ruled vast realms. Queens who were brilliant yet deeply isolated. Children burdened with responsibilities far beyond their years. And geniuses who sketched impossibilities for the sheer joy of thinking them. History is full of absurdity, irony, and fragile beauty. And when we examine it, slowly, gently, we see that these distant figures were not invincible. They were, in the end, quietly human and ever so slightly ridiculous, a reminder that imperfection is universal. A gentle closing. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine these lives softly. A young prince, sitting alone in a candlelit chamber. A queen, staring at her reflection in a mirror, brushing hair as long as a story. Leonardo, sketching the impossible, smiling quietly at his own distractions. No battles, no urgent politics, no screaming advisors, just the human rhythm, hopes, anxieties, obsessions, and small absurdities that make history quietly mesmerizing. Take a deep, slow breath. Feel the weight of history settle softly, and let the gentle absurdity, the ironic triumphs, and the melancholy of these lives lull you into rest. Because, in the end, we are all a little human, we are all a little absurd, and we are always quietly remarkable in our own imperfect way. Good night.